Hi, I'm Tessa, a veteran educator working in the field of special education.
And I'm Kim, mom of two autistic boys and a late diagnosed autistic person myself.
And welcome to Totally Over the Spectrum, where we dive into embracing autism through understanding and support. Welcome to episode 26, and today we're going to be discussing when do you share your child's diagnosis for ASD?
If you are the parent or the caregiver of an autistic child, when do you share that information? And how much information do you share?
Okay, so let's break this down. We both come, as always, with our own perspective and own research. And I'll let you stick with your list, and we can bounce back and forth on this one.
I think it's kind of tricky, right? And so I broke it down into a few different groups. So I broke it down into when do you tell your family, when do you tell your child, right? Your autistic child, when do you share that information with them? When do you tell other parents? And when do you tell the school? And then just strangers, like if you're out in the community,
Okay.
like when do you share that? Because I think that those are all really different sets of relationships.
Yeah.
And as a parent with two autistic kids being really different, Alex is level 1, so he has lower support needs, and Peter's level 3, non-speaking, with higher support needs. So that was a different question for each of those kids. Who and when I share information and how much.
Yeah, I agree with you. So one of the top research pieces that I got was your child's developmental stage and whether they're level 1, 2, or 3, right? So those were the two that were the highest feedback that I got on. So for, like you said, for Alex being a level 1, that information and that discussion, is going to be very different with Alex himself versus Peter, who's a level 3, and that discussion would have looked very different if indeed it did take place.
Yeah, exactly that. So let's go through my list.
Okay, let's do this.
So for my family, the kids were 2 and 6. So Peter was 2 and Alex was 6 when they got their diagnosis. They got both at the same time. So for my family, I said point blank that the boys were going for an assessment and this is what it is and this is what it was. And when they received their diagnoses, that was just a matter of fact for me.
Okay.
And I know in my family, no one gave me a hard time, but I know that's not the case in a lot of families.
Yes, especially I think when it comes to your level 1, because, a lot of people might and often do turn around and say, well, it's just their personality or their quirks, right? They resist wanting that labeling to occur. And it comes, I think, a lot of times from a protective stance versus a stance of going, a shameful one, right, of being diagnosed. So in all honesty, when I've had people say, oh, I don't want other people, no, it's just because they're being more protective because they're concerned about how society is going to react to their child or grandchild having this diagnosis.
Yeah, and I think it's also on a personal level. They're like, oh, well, I was like that when I was a kid because it's genetic, right? And they don't want to admit that some of those traits might also refer to them.
That's the other aspect too, yeah, looking in the mirror.
Yeah. I met one woman who didn't want to tell her family, and her child was diagnosed at 7, and she didn't want to tell her son either when he was diagnosed. So she was afraid of stigma, like you were saying, and she didn't want anyone to treat him differently, and she didn't want him to think of himself in a negative way. And I understood where she was coming from her perspective, but to me, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with it, right? Like there's nothing wrong. So to treat it like it's something not to share is kind of like what message are you sending to those people? Like, I mean, she would know her family best. And if she knew that her family was not going to be supportive, it might have just been an easier road as she was navigating everything to just not tell them.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to need time to digest this information and, do your research on it, and put into place all the steps that you really need to before starting to venture out and telling people, if you so wish.
Yeah. When Alex was diagnosed at 6, I didn't talk to him about it right away because he was 6. Right? So I didn't hide it from him either, though. We just didn't have a discussion about it.
Yeah. So that goes back to the child's developmental stage and, and the readiness of that child to be able to accept that information, understand that information based on their cognitive ability, and age. And, and then you've also, once you give them this information, you've also got to be prepared to give them tools to deal with this information too.
Yeah, I didn't think it really mattered to him at that age. Like, I don't think he wasn't particularly bothered. So when he started asking questions about Peter, like why doesn't he talk and why does he have certain behaviors and those sorts of things, we had a conversation about autism in general and how it's different for every single person. And in that conversation, I said, you're also autistic. It's just your traits are a little different than Peter's traits. And there was no particular emotion from me with that. It was simply just information. And when we were done talking about it, I asked him what he thought about it. And he was like, he wasn't bothered. And in true Alex fashion, he said, well, I'm not like Peter, so I'm good.
That is true Alec fashion, yes.
And what he was really trying to say was that Alex had really advanced language. And it was really bothersome for him that Peter's language was so delayed. And he did a lot of vocal repetition and a lot of vocal stimming and a lot of different pitches and those sorts of things, which makes Alex crazy. He can't stand that. But mostly it was the lack of proper enunciation of words.
Yes.
Right? So it just drove Alex nuts. Still drives Alex a little bit nuts. But I feel that as a parent, you are setting the tone for how your kids are going to receive that information.
And you also set the tone of how others also treat your child, right? If when you present the information, a lot of the research that I've done said, keep it factual. Keep it simple, keep the language simple, keep it very factual. And if people who truly are invested and will reach out to you and ask for more information when they think it's appropriate.
At some point, your child is going to know that they are different. They just are. People might not know what it is about you that is different, but they know almost immediately when they meet you that something is different, unless you are super good at masking. So, and it probably happens at a much younger age than you think it does.
It does. It happens as early as kindergarten. For an educator who's worked from kindergarten right up onto grade 12, it is younger kids are far more susceptible to pick up with things that are unusual or not the norm. But on the other aspect of it, they're far more embracing, right? So the younger kids, they pick up on it very quickly, but they're quick to embrace it as well.
Right. And if you say, oh, the reason Peter's like this is because he's autistic, they're like, oh, okay.
Yep.
And it's just a thing. Yep. And they just carry it through and they don't think anything differently of that. These kids are going to feel at some point like they're an alien, right? Because you don't fit in. You like everybody else has this rule book of what things that are going on socially and you didn't get one and you don't understand what's happening. So you always feel like someone looking from the outside in at other people. And I would think, like, why wouldn't you want to empower your child with acceptance and understanding, right? And help them, give them the tools that they need to be successful.
I agree completely with you on that point.
When it came to telling other parents, so for Alex, he started a new school in grade 2. and the people sort of descended like fresh meat, and everybody invited him to, this is a fairly small school, to play dates and that sort of thing. And because he had only been diagnosed for about a year, I didn't know what to say to people or what to do, or I didn't know how to handle it and all of those things. So at first I just didn't say anything because I just didn't know what to do. So I just didn't do anything. And then I had a mom come up to me and say, you know, the other moms have been talking and they're saying that there's something up with Alex. And I just said, yeah, he's autistic. And that spread like wildfire because it was also kind of a gossipy sort of group of parents, and also kind of a judgmental set of parents. School was great. So, and then the play dates mostly stopped after that. And it wasn't like the kids didn't like him. There were a few kids that, you know, were pretty good with him. And then the other kids, I think, just sort of, like all kids, there are people you like to hang out with and people you don't. There was a little bit of bullying that happened in grade school. But Alex never seemed to really take that to heart. He didn't really care, to be honest. And the bullying wasn't severe. It wasn't everyday kind of thing. And I told him to stand up for himself.
That is when having that open conversation with your child about their diagnosis really does empower them, right? And it also gives them the tools to educate other kids when the opportunity arises, which is the other aspect of empowering your kids with knowledge.
I think now if I could do it again, I would just say he's autistic right out the gate before he ever went on a play date. And if people didn't invite him, then they didn't invite him. But I would be able to weed out those people right away.
And that goes back to having conversations that we did about, you know, being a teenager or an adolescent and, you know, and cultivating that support group, right? And it starts young. And when you are open and upfront about your diagnosis at a younger age, like you said, you weed out the people that are not going to be that really good supportive factor for your kid. So I see it as a plus of being able to put it out there and, you know, and start weeding out those who are not going to be the positive, you know, influences in your child's life.
Because Alex went from grade 2 to grade 8 with pretty much the same set of kids, as they got older, that bullying just dissipated altogether.
Yeah. And it's, you know, and I just want to also say bullying occurs whether you have autism or whether you have, you know, any other type of diagnosis or no diagnosis at all, you know, just personality traits, appearances. It happens in school. It's a fact. You know, it's unfortunate. There are a lot of programs put into place to reduce the bullying that occurs in schools, and it's got much better, but it's still got a long way to go.
When it came to talking to people about Peter and his diagnosis, Peter being level 3 and non-speaking, it's pretty apparent, right? I didn't really have to make an announcement about it. You know, like people would just know he's you know, running around and making a lot of vocal stimming and that sort of thing. So yeah, you don't need to come out and say, hey, he was still invited to class parties. If someone was having a birthday party and they were inviting the class, he was invited. And he had a really great group of kids that he was in school with, and they all loved him. And so when he was invited to a party, I would approach the parent and I'd say, hey, you know, is it okay if I come along and support Peter so that he can go? And I never had anyone say no. And they were always happy to have him, and they were always happy to have me there with him.
And that just, you know, and I think that shows a very distinct line between your level 1 and level 3s, right? And that, you know, cognitive ability of level 1 and sometimes a very high or, you know, I'm going to use superior intelligence and language skills like Alex was, where, you know, they wonder if, oh, is he really autistic, or is he arrogant, or, you know, some of those, you know, presumed behavior traits as, you know, a person who doesn't understand autism well enough, versus Peter, who's your level 3, and it's just like, oh yeah, he has autism, and it is what it is. So it goes to show you that distinct line in the sand between the two.
Yeah, and I think I mean I've read a lot of stories of parents with higher support needs, autistic kids, and they don't get invited places. And I have to say that Peter is really fun, and he's really sweet. He's really good natured. He doesn't have any sort of violent tendencies. Like, he's really easy to get along with, and he's mostly happy to do his own thing, right? So he doesn't have those traits that other people find disturbing.
Yeah,
And that's really what it comes down to, is how much an autistic trait bothers somebody else.
I agree with you. Yeah, and I think you hit on a key component over there, is when you have autistic traits, when there's aggression involved, the divide in creating that companionship with others, peer-to-peer companionship, that becomes extremely vast, right? Which, we've spoken about, in aggression and behavior. These are some of the reasons why we've always suggested dealing with the behavior at a very young age, in order to be able to give your child the best opportunity to foster and nurture relationships as they grow older.
Yeah. So that brings us to the school. So when did I share the diagnoses with the school? Immediately. How are you going to get the supports if you don't share the information?
Yeah, there's formalities that have to occur within each school board, and each school board is different. And it does take time. It does take an extraordinary, a long time in order to get everything put into place, right? From start to finish. So if you want support that is going to be best for your child's learning and their environment, I agree, it needs to be shared as soon as possible.
If there were any behaviors that impacted the kid's ability to be successful at school, I shared those, right? When I was asked by the school if they could share information with other parties, like the speech and language pathologist or the occupational therapist, I was always on board, because the more information they have, the better they are able to select tools specific to each of my kids. Mm-hmm. Right? If they don't have the information, they're just guessing.
And don't forget that your kids are in an environment for majority of their day, their consciousness of their day, right? When they're at home with you, yes, prior to going to school, and when they come back, and the rest of the time they're asleep. So it is important to share all of that information, because the support that they can get is going to be able to benefit you as a family in the long run.
I even shared things that got a little bit touchy, right? So when Peter became a little bit older, I think he was like 13 or so, he started to discover his body. And I wrote an email to the teacher, because it was sort of over the summer that this behavior started. And I wrote an email to the teacher before school year started, and I said, hey, heads up, he's started masturbating, using the language. And I said, if this happens at school, please let me know, so that we can be on the same page on how we're going to deal with this behavior, because it is not appropriate at school, right? Should not be happening at school. And I want to be able to have the same language and the same response to the behavior, that I want you to use the same stuff that I would be using at home. And we talk about this in episode 11, sexuality and gender identity, and I will put a link to that one. But I think we've both seen the negative consequences of when parents are not open with school.
Yes, it makes certainly my job as an educator extremely difficult, right? It's kind of reading between the lines. I can do successfully to a certain point, but in order for them to be successful and create and develop the life skills, the necessary life skills, everybody has to be on board. And you and I together accomplished a lot, because we were on the same page and we mirrored everything that we did. And therefore, Peter is as successful as he is because of that relationship between home and school, and being able to have, open dialect between his everyday life and his goals, right? You were on board with what needed to be done at school, and school was on board with what you needed to have done at home.
And I also knew, because you had let me know this, that if that behavior was happening at school, they would not relay that information at home if home has not opened the door to be accepting of hearing about it.
And there are parents who go, yep, no, this cannot happen. It does happen. This is part of developmental. Like, you're not going to stop it. So having open communication is crucial.
So that brings us to strangers. Like, when your kids are out in the community, how much information do you share?
I think that goes back to depending upon your level, right? Whether you're level 1, depending upon the circumstance. It would have to be a circumstance much like if you're an adult or an adolescent in an emergency situation, right? Where you needed to relay that information. For your level 1 learners, your level 1 autism. But your level 3, if it's once again a safety, people would know straight away as well.
Well, they're going to know
So-
that something's up, but they might not necessarily know what it is. And people are always going to judge you as a parent. Always. They're always judging you as a parent. And I have a lot of colorful expletives to describe the ways in which I do not care about their unsolicited opinions. So I think for every situation, I ask myself, what would be the most helpful for my child in this situation? And how much information does this person need in order to help my child? Or the last one would be, can I educate that person? So to give you an example. So I was in a big box store. I was shopping with Peter, and he was 8, maybe 9 or something. And he laid down on the floor on his back and started giggling, just, monkeying around. And so I stood there and I verbally was encouraging him to get up, but I didn't physically try to get him to stand up. Like, he knows how to stand. Like, he can understand what I'm saying to him, right? So sometimes you have to be patient. They don't just get up right away. So I was talking to him, and this older couple came by, man and a woman, and she was not impressed, and she started loudly complaining that she couldn't see the display because this child was on the floor acting like a 2-year-old. That's what she said. So immediately I start to, I'm getting ready for possible confrontation here. And her husband looked so defeated, and he sort of dropped his head and he said, he's not even in the way. And in that moment, I decided to say nothing, because I was pretty sure that she was not going to be receptive to anything I said. And I was only going to make her husband's day worse by saying something, because she was already on a tirade. And Peter really wasn't blocking anything. Like, you could still see everything, you could get to everything. It's just he was there, and she decided that that was where she needed to be. So I didn't say anything, and they moved on. And later in the store, Peter did get up, and started walking around. So later in the store, I could hear her in another section loudly complaining about something else. So I felt like I had made a good decision in that moment. But you have to make the decision in the moment for whatever that situation is. If I thought that I could educate her in that moment, I might have, depending on how much energy I had, try to explain something to her. But some people are just not going to be receptive.
Yep. Now, I do the opposite. So if I'm out in the community with one of my students, or when I do provide respite care, I approach people and say, hey, we're out learning this skill. Would you be willing to be a participant in the learning of this skill, right? Such as greeting, right? I'm just giving you a very simple, opportunity in which I would, get my students to greet somebody appropriately. Whether we go to the grocery store and we put things on the conveyor belt and have them stand and say, hey, I'm working with my student right now. We're working on greeting. So would you mind if we took the opportunity to, encourage appropriate social greetings. And 9 times out of 10, I would say most people are receptive in that. And, it kind of, I people see people go, oh yeah, like, a little bit of sense of pride that they get to participate and make such a positive impact on somebody else's life. So I do that. I do share a little bit of information. I never share the actual diagnosis. I just say I'm working with my student who has special needs, and this is what we're working on. Would you be a participant in that? So I do share it when I am on the job, when I'm working, and the opportunity presents itself to learn and acquire a skill. So just giving a little bit of a tip there, but I do.
I mean, I'm not a teacher, right? So it's not in the forefront of my mind to turn every situation into a teachable moment. And sometimes it hits you hard as a parent when someone is so negative towards your child, right? And it is really hard to separate that feeling from, hey, maybe this might be a teachable moment, when you're like in your mind thinking intrusive thoughts about this ignorant woman, right? Which you never act on. They're intrusive, but you know what I mean? Like, and I mean, do you think that she would have been receptive if you had, like, she might have turned it around had you approached her in that way? I don't know. Mostly I was just thinking you were rude in a lot of, nasty words for her.
So, yeah, so I think we both agree that depending upon the situation, a teachable moment, whether you're teaching others about, autism, or using others to teach your child, life skills, I think is appropriate.
To be fair, most of the interactions that I have when Peter's out in the community are people want to talk to him, right? They want to talk to him. They want to, if he has his iPad with him and he's doing something, they're like, oh, hey, what are you watching? Or what are you doing? Or that sort of thing. So mostly people are pretty good.
Yeah, I agree with you. What's next on your hit list?
That's it.
Okay. I think one thing I'd like to bring up is sharing, depending upon the situation, especially with our younger, kids that are diagnosed. I would say your toddlers to about, I would say 9, possibly 10, depending upon their level. Sharing some information within the community is key, because one big safety factor that always comes into play is eloping. And that's when sharing of that information is absolutely crucial to keeping your little one safe. And I think that's a great episode for us to discuss in order to bring forward the safety aspects of eloping.
Yep, definitely something I can relate to. Peter is a runner.
Okay, so we'll tie that up in our next episode. Until then, take care.
We'll see you then. Thanks for tuning in. If you know someone who might find this episode helpful, feel free to share. Also, check out our website and socials linked in the description.